privilege to introduce our baccalaureate speaker, Mrs. Laura Bush. Mrs. Bush is a passionate advocate of human rights, education, and global literacy. Through extensive international travel, Mrs. Bush has contributed to the lives of men and women all over the world. She is a native Texan, a former teacher and librarian, and a mother of two. Ladies and gentlemen, the former First Lady of the United States, Mrs. Laura Bush.
Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for the very, very warm welcome. And thank you, Carlton, Senior Class President. And thanks especially for the gift that the senior class has given, the generous gift that the senior class has given to the Bush Center, which is being built, as you all know, at SMU. And I hope that when you all come home from college, that you'll come by the Bush Center. It will be complete with the grand opening this time next year. So just as you complete your freshman year in college, we'll be moved in over there at the Bush Center, so I hope you'll come by then. Thank you very much for the gift to me. Principal Kelly, Dr. Orr, thank you very much. I want to recognize both the superintendent and your principal. Thank you all for inviting me to speak at your baccalaureate on this special day. Congratulations to the Highland Park High School class of 2012. And congratulations to your parents and your families and your teachers whose love and support has brought you to this day. You can see on the faces of your parents how proud they are of you. And one thing I've learned from being a parent is that it's irresistible for people my age to offer unsolicited advice. And it's impossible for people your age to pay any attention to it. So I promise to tread lightly today and try not to lecture you about what you should do with your lives after graduation. Besides, if your life turns out to be anything like mine, it won't go according to plan, and that's a good thing. Graduation is a special time in the life of a community, and it's especially meaningful in Highland Park, where Scott pride is as big as the posters of students that hang in every store in town. As Highland Park students, you're fortunate to be part of a community that supports every one of your activities, from football to cross-country to the academic decathletes. We cheer for the Scots. We celebrate your victories. And next Friday, the whole community will cheer as each of you graduate. Today, you're full of anticipation, ready to pose for a few pictures and claim that piece of paper that proves that you are a graduate of Highland Park High School. You're smiling even as I say it. When I reflected on what to say to you, I remembered my own graduations. The speakers at my graduations probably called us to greatness, but I don't remember much of what they said. I just remember how I felt. Relieved that finals were over, excited to embark on the next adventure, and impatient for the speaker to finish. I thought of when I received my master's degree at the University of Texas, but I couldn't recall who gave that address. That's because I skipped the ceremony. But I did look it up, and you can imagine my surprise when I found out it was some guy named George Bush. I married his son. In 40 years, you may not remember who spoke at your baccalaureate, but I know you'll have many, many memories of your years at Highland Park High School. Eating victory apples during pep rallies, supporting the Bell Spaghetti Supper, and winning the state championships in swimming and diving soccer, cross country, lacrosse, golf, and the tennis team's record-breaking 13th state championship. Gymnasts won gold medals. The science team won its 6th consecutive state title, and the choir, band, and orchestra received all state honors. And your individual academic successes are more than we can even list. Each of you left your own mark as you painted the senior wall. This morning's baccalaureate ceremony is an opportunity to pause in the middle of the graduation whirlwind, to take a moment to reflect on what you've learned at Highland Park High School before you go forth to serve. Class of 2012, your high school years are short in the scope of your whole lifetime, but what you learned here will be influential for the rest of your lives. Many of these lessons you learned in the classroom. Others were on the athletic fields. You learned from your academic discoveries, from your disappointments and your triumphs, and from the friends that you cherish. Some of the first people you met here are now your best friends, and they'll be your best friends long after you leave. The friends I made growing up in Midland are still some of my best friends today. Some of the most important lessons, the ones that will guide you through life, you've learned in the practice of your faith. And you know that with faith comes a calling to give freely, as freely you've received. And that to those whom much is given, much is required. To feed the hungry, to comfort the mourning, to lift up the weary, and to heal the sick. From academics and athletics to civics and service, you know that you've matured since those first days of high school 4 years ago. And as you go forth to serve, the next chapter of your life has been shaped by your time here. As much as any generation of Americans, the class of 2012 is tasked with resolving challenges that lie far beyond your doorstep, even far beyond America's borders. Between cell phones and the internet, there's a world of information literally at our fingertips. And because our world is so small, we can't ignore the earthquakes in Indonesia, or the orphans in Haiti, or the suffering of AIDS patients in Africa. Today begins a great period of liberty and adventure, a time to find your calling and to demand the most from life before life makes specific demands on you. And as you face this new chapter in life, I can tell you one thing for certain. You won't waste your talents and your education if you use them to help people. When I graduated from high school in Midland, I knew already that I wanted to be a teacher. And after traversing what seemed like half the state of Texas with my parents, looking at schools, I chose to attend SMU. My high school English teachers had taught me how to write, and my college professors reinforced my love of reading. My favorite literature professor at SMU, Dr. Harriet Earhart, is still a friend of mine. Her children's literature class inspired me to become a librarian. The books I read in her class, I later read to children in my own classrooms, and to my own children, and to children in schools I visited across our country and around the world. When I graduated from SMU in 1968, it was the height of the civil rights movement, and I wanted to do what I could. So I requested to teach in an inner-city minority school. I wanted to work with students who had been left out and too often left behind, simply because of the color of their skin. But I wasn't prepared for the poverty I encountered in an inner-city Houston school. Most of the students lived on narrow side streets behind the school buildings. Some were hungry. They would come to school in the morning with their bellies rumbling, and ravenously attacked the free breakfast and lunch that we gave them. I wanted to help those children so badly, to reach into their lives and somehow make a difference, but it was an uphill fight. Before I left that teaching job in Houston to go to graduate school, I decided to take a few of my favorite students to Astro World, an amusement park near the old baseball stadium. That day we picked up several eager kids, but when we came to the last house, the little boy who was supposed to go with us opened the door in his underwear. Though we could hear his mother in the back of the house, she never came to the door to give us permission to take him. And so we had no choice but to leave him there. All I could do was hug him goodbye with an extra squeeze and leave him standing there to watch us all drive off to Astro World without him. One summer day, a few years later, I went over to some friends' house to eat hamburgers in their backyard. There was somebody named George Bush there that they wanted me to meet. We hit it off, and the next day he called me and asked me to go out on a date to the most exciting place in Midland, Texas, the miniature golf course. And you know what I found out? The most transformative events in your life are not necessarily the lessons you learn, the things you carefully plan, but the random things that life sets in your path. Moments in which you realize it's time to take a risk or change course. Here I was playing miniature golf with some guy in Midland. 5 years later, that guy and I had twins. 10 years after that, we were living in Washington, D.C., helping his father get elected president. And 10 years after that, George was president, and we were living in the White House, in a nation forever altered by the attacks of September 11th. I was on Capitol Hill that morning, sitting in the office of the late Senator Ted Kennedy, preparing to give a briefing to the Senate Education Committee when the World Trade Center was engulfed in flames. The Pentagon was struck, and a few dozen brave men and women defeated their hijackers over a grassy field in Pennsylvania. George and I cried with the grieving families, and we prayed with the nation. And we never forgot that day for the rest of his time in office, and we'll never forget it for the rest of our lives. The years George served as president in the first decade of the new century were as consequential as any in our history. And we were privileged to meet firsthand the kind of people that these years called forth. We met the voices for freedom, like the former Czech president, Václav Havel. We met Chinese dissidents who'd been in prison for practicing Christianity. And we met freedom fighters from Syria and Cuba. At the White House and at our ranch in Crawford, we hosted presidents and prime ministers, the Queen of England, the Dalai Lama, and the Pope on his birthday. But the most inspiring people we met in those 2 presidential terms didn't have titles. They were the first responders who worked past exhaustion and at peril to their own health and safety to rescue people in New York at Ground Zero or Washington at the Pentagon. They were the brave men and women who volunteered to defend our country, who risked their lives and often gave their lives so that the rest of us might never know terror again. They were the volunteers of all ages who made their way to the Gulf Coast after Hurricane Katrina to cook meals and distribute clothing and offer comfort to families who had lost everything. I promised I wouldn't bombard you with advice today, but I can't resist issuing a challenge. And that challenge is to seek out people like this in your lives. People who are enterprising, energetic, indefatigable, and compassionate. People who care. People who dare. Attach yourself to them. Learn from them. And look for the qualities inside yourself that will help you become one of them. What all these people have in common is a commitment to service. Any definition of a successful life, my father-in-law, President Bush, once remarked, must include service to others. That principle has governed not only his life, but his children and grandchildren's as well. In his 2002 State of the Union address, President George W. Bush asked every American to dedicate 2 years or 4,000 hours, over the rest of their lives to help their neighbors in need. The class of 2012 has answered that call in significant ways. And you know that service and civic involvement are central to the lessons you've learned here at Highland Park. You've given 64,000 hours of service, and you've raised thousands of dollars to support local, national, and international causes. You spent school breaks helping those in need in Latin America and Africa. And right here at home, you've tutored students in after-school programs. You've collected food for the homeless, and you've hosted blood drives to help hundreds of people in need. As you begin the next chapter in your lives, there's so many needs to be met, and so many ways you can help. The colleges and universities that you've chosen to attend have many different degree programs to consider and projects to be involved in. You may choose to study to become a teacher or a doctor. You may choose to serve in uniform in the military or out of the uniform in Peace Corps. Or you may choose to study government and run for a public office to serve your state or local community. Not every story will end in triumph, of course. We all know that. And if I ever need to remind myself of that fact, all I have to do is think back to the haunting memory of that little boy in Houston, standing in the door in his underwear, the little boy who didn't get to go to Astro World. He'd be in his 50s now. What happened to him? I ask myself sometimes. Is he still alive? Did he manage to escape that dilapidated house in Houston with the mother who wouldn't come to the door? Did he find another teacher who cared about him? Did he graduate from high school or even college and find a job where he was valued? Is he standing in an airport right now, a proud father, anxiously awaiting his son or daughter to come home at last from Afghanistan? Or is he standing instead by the highway with a cardboard sign, or sitting by himself in a joyless, empty room, wondering how it all turned out this way? As you leave Highland Park High School, whether you plan to teach or pursue another path of service, my challenge to you is really the same challenge I've given myself: not to forget that boy. To never forget that one trip to Astro World, one reading lesson, one consoling touch, one friendly smile, one check written, or one busy hour given over to someone who needs you. These are the things that quite literally make all the difference in the world. And one other thing, when a stranger asks you out of the blue to play miniature golf, take my word for it and say yes. Congratulations to each one of you, and thank you for giving me the chance to share this special day with you. May God bless the class of 2012. Thank you.